Okay, well, who wouldn't want to wait for Facebook Live?
How's our Twitter feed looking? Pretty good?
Yeah, Instagram or, you know. You're not going to start tweeting about this, are you? No. All right, here we go. Nice to know you're on Facebook. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, January 7, 2020 meeting of the Edina City Council, and Happy New Year to everyone. Roll call, please. Ms. Allison?
Member Fisher?
Here.
Member Staunton? Member Brindle? Here. Member Anderson?
Here.
Mayor Hovland?
Here. For those of you in the audience who would care to join the council in saying the Pledge of Allegiance, please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this evening. There's one modification that I'd like to make under Roman 8, which is the report and recommendations section. I'd like to move switch A and C so that the Prospect Knolls A neighborhood roadway reconstruction improvement, it would be item A, and then we would move the West 72nd Street pedestrian safety assessment engagement report down to C. Does anyone else have a modification they want to make on the agenda? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the amended agenda as shown. Or as described. All right, we got a motion. Is there a second? We've got a motion and second to adopt the amended agenda as described. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Community comment. Is there anyone in the audience this evening that wishes to address the council on a matter of concern to them that's not otherwise on the agenda this evening?
Staff about a potential lot for a third fire station in the northeast side of Edina and possible use for an E-line bus stop. The property on northwest corner of 58th and France, 5740 France Avenue, is currently up for sale for $3,049. And given that it's a corner property, has access from both streets, so you don't have to back in your fire equipment or your your fire equipment or your ambulance. And then you can also have a little extra space for maybe a heated stop for people in the neighborhood that could take that E-line. So I just wanted to give you the MLS listing so that you have that. And hopefully that's something the city could purchase and then sit on until they figure out what they need to do and or get the funds to do the fire station. So
Have you got that MLS number?
Yeah, I've got it right over here. Yep.
All right, if you want to hand that to the clerk, is that okay?
Yep.
Or, yeah, to the clerk. All right, thank you, Mr. Brown. And anyone else wish to address the council this evening? Starting out 2020 with a familiar face, now is impaired a bit. It looks like we got something happened over the holidays to Mr. Lorenz.
Could I get the microphone? And before you leave, if I want, is something like this in multicolor going to show up at all, even though it isn't perfectly flat?
Yep.
Okay.
And there's zoom in and zoom out if you want to.
No, I just want to identify the document itself rather than.
I think we're good.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mayor Hovland. Unfortunately, although I am old enough to qualify for Social Security, my left hip is 150 years old, and it's out of warranty. So
All right. And then, could you identify yourself for the
Right,
record, please?
Frank
And your address?
Lorenz, 7151 York Avenue South, Edina, 55435. Well,
Thank you.
most of the residents of Edina should have received in the mail recently the document that I have up on the screen, and it purports to talk about the decision that's been made to purchase 4 new replacement fire trucks. I'm concerned with the fact that the staff that writes this are selectively picking up facts. If I can read this myself, it's and this is quoting the Mr. Schmitz, the fire chief. If we'd purchased just one replacement engine, which was destroyed in an automobile accident on the highway, and the hydraulic platform truck, that would have cost $2 million. But he goes on to say, once we started putting together the numbers, the stretch to replace all the trucks, that is 2 more trucks, at once wasn't that far, said Mr. Schmitz. $3.1 million purchase. Well, you know, you may have actually got a slight reduction from the vehicle manufacturer if you were ordering at least 3 of the trucks all the same, but no one in their right mind who's an adult in the private sector would say, you know, as long as we're going to spend $2 million, let's spend $3.1 million. I mean, come on, what's $1.1 million between friends, you know? And you made the decision, you, the city council, made the decision, and the city manager, made the decision that instead of replacing your fire engines every 20 years, you're going to replace them every 10. Well, these decisions have consequences, and they cost the taxpayers money. I mean, is there ever a point when we will have too many fire engines? Maybe not. I mean, the man that preceded me suggests that there's property where you can build a new fire station. I mean, should every house have its own fire engine parked out in front? I don't think they can do that because there's no parking on the streets in the winter. But honestly, you're wasting money. 20-year replacement was fine because every other city in the state uses that, but not good enough for Edina. So you're playing with other people's money.
Thank you, Mr. Lorenz. Anyone else? All right, we'll move on to the next portion of the agenda beyond community comment, and that is the city manager's response to community comments that were made at our last meeting in December. And so, Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. We had one community comment at our December 17, 2019 meeting, and that comment was from a resident who was expressing concern about the lack of pedestrian safety, lack of sidewalks and pedestrian crossings around Southdale Center. We had a chance, staff had a chance to visit with that resident actually that evening and get a better sense of what the concerns were, and we will be talking about those concerns with the ETC this year.
All right, good. Prompt any questions from any council members? And then with respect to the issues that were raised this evening by Mr. Brown and Mr. Lorenz, Manager Neal will be addressing those in 2 weeks. On to the next portion of the agenda, which is the consent agenda. Is there anyone on the council that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing nothing, is there a motion to adopt?
I do.
Oh, sorry.
Just had to look at it.
All right.
Item E. E is in Edward.
Okay, the official newspaper. All right. Any other removals? This is the time of the year when we do some annual housekeeping on some issues that go on from year to year, including the resolution designating the official newspaper for 2020. That's the matter that Member Brindle has asked us to pull. With the exception of 6E, is there a motion to approve the balance of the consent agenda?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and second to approve the consent agenda with the exception of 6E. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda with the exception of 6E, say aye.
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 Opposed? Carried. And then back to 6E, which is Resolution 2020-03, which would designate the official newspaper for 2020. Member Brindle.
Thank you. I actually pull this off every year. So the distribution of the Edina Sun Current, while it is our local newspaper, we designating it as our official newspaper, meaning that all of our public notices go in this official newspaper. My concern is the distribution of the Edina Sun Current broad enough and wide enough that it actually gets our public notices out to enough people to make it worth designating that newspaper as our official newspaper. The last we talked about the current method of subscribing, which you need to do now, subscribing to the Edina Sun Current, I think it was well fewer than 10,000 subscribers, like 6,000 subscribers to the Edina Sun Current. And we have 22,000 residential households in our city. And so it just seems to me that the Edina Sun Current is not the best way to get our notices out. And I guess I would suggest, start my suggestion with a question, and that is, regarding Addition Edina, does that go to all households in Edina?
Member Brindle and members of council, yes, it does.
Okay, so it seems to me that that would be the better official newspaper if it reaches all the house. Does it reach apartments as well as single-family homes?
How are we doing apartments right now? Yeah. Yeah, it's not we can't substitute a newsletter for a newspaper.
All
Your
right.
concern is valid, and we would agree with that. And
Yeah.
we've seen continued slippage with subscription and with circulation, but it is still the only newspaper that's it's headquartered here. It's the newspaper that residents tend to look at when if they're looking for our public advertisements and public notices. And the only real alternative that fits the statutory requirement is probably the Star Tribune. And one of our concerns with that paper is that our ads will get lost in a sea of a greater number of public ads and private ads.
Okay, so we pay for this.
We do.
Okay, so do you think we're getting our money's worth?
No.
Well, do we have an alternative?
No.
Okay.
We don't. The cities are active in the legislature to try to press this issue, to allow us to do our public notices in alternative ways and comply with state law. The Newspaper Association resists that every year, so that's an issue that is taken on by the legislature. But at this point, we really don't have an alternative.
Okay. Do we have to have an official newspaper?
We do.
Yes, we do.
Okay, all right. Well,
Attorney Knutson, any comment about the reason for an official newspaper?
Because the Newspaper Association thinks it's a good idea. That's my opinion.
okay. Well, if we have to have one and we don't have any other option, I guess that's what it is. But as I say every year, I'd really like to resolve this so that we're confident that we're getting what we pay for and that our notices are getting out.
Staff would agree with that.
So
I suppose you would reluctantly move
I
the matter?
was,
or-
that is
or don't you even
exactly
want to
the
have anything to do
wording.
with it?
That is exactly the wording I would use. I reluctantly make a motion to adopt Resolution 2020-03, designating the Edina Sun-Current as our official newspaper for 2020.
Is there a second?
I will enthusiastically second her reluctant motion.
All right?
No, I thought you were going to say tepidly.
Okay, I'd like, if I could, just make a
Yes.
comment, and maybe this is my repeat comment every year. You know, people still have an opportunity to select, you know, we've worked, since I've been on the council, we've improved and made easier the opportunity to get that paper. It is now showing up in people's mailbox, not in your hedges, not on the curb, not at your neighbor's place or the next block. It can come to your mailbox. All you have to do is let them know that you want it. And so, given it is our only official way to notify people of official city notifications, I would hope more people would do that.
We've got a motion and second discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That was really the most reticent aye I think ever heard you utter. It was it's the necessary aye. All right. That takes us to public hearings, and the first public hearing matter we have tonight involves a potential liquor license suspension. And Ms. Allison and Lieutenant Dan Conboy have this matter this evening. It involves Homewood Suites and a potential suspension of their liquor license. Clerk
Mr.
Allison.
Mayor, members of the council, this item is before you tonight because liquor license suspension is required to be done via a public hearing by state statute and city ordinance. This is Homewood Suites' second offense within 24 months, and they have paid the fine. There is also a 3-day suspension that should be approved. And Lieutenant Conboy is, before I turn to Lieutenant Conboy, actually, Joshua Clark from Homewood Suites is here in attendance tonight. If you have any questions for him, he'd be more than happy to answer those questions. And I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Conboy now to explain the compliance check that is done by the police department.
All right, thank you. Lieutenant Conboy.
Mayor and council members, thanks. On November 20th of 2019, our police department conducted alcohol compliance checks on all liquor establishments. And during the course of that, an employee at Homewood Suites served alcohol to a person under 21. That employee was issued a citation on site there. And obviously, we're here now to discuss the fine for the business and the possible suspension.
Questions for Lieutenant Conboy? I think the process in the past has been that we actually forewarn our wine and beer license holders, our liquor license holders, at some time over a certain period of time, we're going to be doing a check.
Yes,
So
yeah,
do
we
still
did
do that?
we sent out a letter in either late October or early November that in the next 60 days we'd be conducting the compliance checks.
Okay, all right. Okay, yeah, disappointing, I'm sure, for the hotel as well. Anything further that you want to add from a presentation standpoint?
Nothing further.
Okay. This is a public hearing matter, and I'm going to open it up for public testimony. Mr. Clark, if you're in the audience, if you wish to comment at all, you're certainly welcome to come forward on behalf of your company, Homewood Suites, and give us your thoughts about the proposed suspension.
The Homewood Suites and our leadership team are very, very sorry for the infraction that was incurred on the 20th. The property, unfortunately, was down our general manager. We're still looking to fill that role. Therefore, I think there was the mistake of understanding that there was a 60-day notice that was issued. That position was vacated September 14th. We put in quite a few different a couple of different things to make sure that it doesn't happen ever again, including a automatic ID checker to verify the IDs, as well as posting signs at all guests and clients would be asked to show their ID prior to putting in an order.
All right. How about training?
We have all gone through training, tips training for our 3 bartenders that are on staff.
Okay. All right. And the only way you can get served is from a bartender? What about, and there's no one waiting tables that would also require training?
Nope, it's all done at the bar.
Okay. Really disappointed this had to happen. I'm sure you are too, but it's a fairly strict liability statute, as you know, from, I'm sure, discussing this with our staff. So thank you for coming this evening. We appreciate your input and your commitment to make sure this doesn't happen again.
My pleasure.
If you want to stand by, there may be other people that wish to testify.
Yep,
So I'm going to
no
leave
problem.
the hearing open. So if you would go ahead and sit down, someone else may wish to occupy that space at the podium. Is there anyone else that wishes to testify regarding this matter? All right, seeing no one coming forward, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We got a motion second to close the public hearing with respect to the potential liquor license suspension for Homewood Suites. Any further discussion? All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Lieutenant Comboy and Clerk Allison, it's under our schematic of enforcement, it's a 3-day liquor license suspension and a $1,000 fine for the second liquor license violation within 24 months. And I noticed from the memo that you had a period recommended for the suspension. Was that arrived at in discussion with Homewood Suites?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we did consult with them to see which 3 days they would like, and they suggested Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I believe it's January 10th
January
through
10th,
the
11th, and 12th, it looks like,
Yes.
coming up shortly. here.
Yes.
Yeah, this weekend. Okay. All right. Well, is there a motion to approve the 3-day liquor license suspension and $1,000 fine due to their second liquor license violation within 24 months for Homewood Suites?
So moved.
Second.
The motion second to approve the Homewood Suites at 6600 York Avenue South, a 3-day liquor license suspension, which would occur on January 10th, 11th, and 12th, 2020, and a $1,000 fine due to their second liquor license violation within 24 months. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Second public hearing matter, and the final public hearing matter we have this evening involves a proposal for a preliminary and final plat with some variances at 4625 Lexington Avenue, and Director Teague has this matter, at least for the opening comments.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. This property location is just south of the Edina Country Club, north of the Southview Middle School and Concord Elementary. There's a look at the property. As you can see, it's located on Lexington Avenue. The property dead ends due to a large wetland just to the east. There's an aerial shot of the subject property. This is a look down Lexington as if you're standing at the end. The subject property is on the left of the screen. I wanted to note that the properties across the street are the rear yards. They access off the street to the north. You can see the mature vegetation there. What the applicant is proposing here is to tear down the existing home and build 2 new single-family homes. The applicant and property owner would build and construct and live in one of the 2 homes. This request requires a preliminary and final plat, lot width variances from 75 feet to 60 feet for both lots, and lot area variances from just over 9,000 square feet to just over 8,000 square feet. That minimum lot size is determined by the median of all properties within 500 feet. So the primary issue for consideration are the findings for variance met. Both staff and the Planning Commission believe that they are. We are recommending approval. The practical difficulty in this case is the existing property was subdivided as 2 lots. What you're looking at is the original plat of the property. As you can see, Lexington kind of was the north boundary of this plat. All the lots within this block are 60 feet wide. So it's lots 7 and 8. So it's essentially establishing the original plat. Now, due to that large wetland that we saw previously, the right-of-way to connect Lexington, that was vacated some years ago. So this was the look of how the properties actually developed over time. We believe that the variance is reasonable in the immediate neighborhood. The lots are similar in size to the west and to the south. They're all 60-foot wide lots. And again, as I mentioned, the lot to the north accesses off of Oak Drive, so it's the rear yard that faces the subject property. So with that, again, staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval of the subdivision subject to the findings and conditions that are outlined in your staff report and resolution. With that, I can stand for questions.
Questions for Director Teague at this point in time? All right, thank you. Stand by, please. And I understand we have the applicant here, Jessica Lindberg.
Correct.
Jessica, yes, please. And if you want to use the overhead, otherwise you could use the side podium. Yes, welcome.
Thanks.
And then would you give us your full name and address, please?
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and council members. My name is Jessica Lindberg, and my husband Dave is right over here. And we've been the property owners of 4625 Lexington since 2012. Before that, we lived exactly 1 block south at 4625 West 56th Street. And that was since 1999, so we've been in this immediate neighborhood for the past 20 years. Our 3 boys, Charlie, Mikey, and Matt, have grown up in this neighborhood, and I've been a teacher for Edina Schools at Highlands Elementary for 23 years and counting. And we love this neighborhood and community. We purchased 4625 Lexington from the second owner of the home, knowing that it was a double lot and we'd want to split the lots in the future, so that's why we're in this process. We believe that subdividing these properties will return the properties back to their intended lot sizes and will match the character of those in the immediate neighborhood. We've reached out to our surrounding neighbors about this project. We've received verbal support and several letters of written support, as you've seen, and we're really appreciative and want to acknowledge the neighbor support we've received, as well as a recommendation for approval from the Planning Department and the unanimous approval from Edina Planning Commission. We appreciate all these individuals' time and effort and their attention to our request and the thorough processes involved in both the staff and the commission's approval. We believe the subdivision aligns with the city's Vision Edina and Edina's comprehensive plan regarding low-density development and supporting Edina's employees to live in the community that they work in. The subdivision and building on the originally platted lots would uphold the character in the immediate neighborhood and the community more so than someone building a McMansion on our current size lot, which is twice the size of all the adjacent lots, and that would require no variances at all. The comp plan lists our property in average condition, and it's adjacent to almost all properties listed in good or excellent condition, and this supports that our 3-bedroom, 1 full bathroom home that we bought from a couple in their 90s who had lived there for over 50 years has had no remodels or additions and is likely considered a tear down or in need of major updating. The comp plan housing section on housing choice includes in goal 4 to support the development of a wide range of housing options to meet the diverse needs and preferences of the existing and future Edina community. It states the city's goal to promote affordable and workforce housing that includes a range of housing prices and options based on the principle that those who contribute to the community should have the opportunity to live here. Therefore, as 20-year Edina residents and being an Edina Public Schools teacher for 23 years, we believe that subdividing these properties will return their properties back to their intended lot sizes and that 2 new homes on the lots would match the character of those in the immediate neighborhood while supporting us to stay in our neighborhood while right-sizing our home. And we have our civil engineer who did the designs for the subdivide here with us tonight to answer any specific questions you might have, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Ms. Lindberg, for that presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Lindberg at this point in time? Okay, stand by. We'll
Okay.
open this matter up for public testimony and see if there's anyone else that wants to testify regarding this matter. I'm now opening this up for public testimony. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to come forward and testify or inquire of the council regarding this proposal? All right, seeing no one coming forward, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion second to close the public hearing. Discussion. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Did Ms. Lindberg's presentation cause anyone to have any further questions for Director Teague? Okay. We had a unanimous vote out of the Planning Commission on this matter. You had a wonderful level of support from your neighborhood, which wouldn't necessarily be the most compelling criteria, but I think you've stated well the evidence in this matter. Amongst our council members, what we need to do is pass a motion adopting Resolution 2019-11, which would approve the subdivision and the variances requested for 4625 Lexington Avenue. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second with respect to the adoption of Resolution 2019-11.
I will just
And then discussion.
correct you briefly and say
All
it's
right.
2020-11.
Yes, I bet, yes, thank you.
So
Nice
we
catch.
should,
My script has failed me here. It's hard to
Oh,
move
yeah.
on to the next year, just like with your
yeah, I'm
checkbook.
looking at, it says 2020 and then down below it says 2019.
Yeah.
So it is 2020.
It is 2020-11. Thank you, Member
Yeah.
Bendel. So we've got Resolution 2020-11, which is the approval of the preliminary and final plat with variances at 4625 Lexington Avenue. Is there any further discussion?
I just have a quick comment.
Yeah, quick comment.
And the reason I think this is, I would call it a slam dunk in the range of when we look at these type of subdivisions, is that the variance we're probably about to approve is taking it back to the original plat. It's very much in concert with the rest of the neighborhood. And as it's pertinent to a conversation we're about to have here tonight, it actually helps pay for infrastructure. This street will be, the cost will be shared by one more property owner at some point. And these are important things that we as a community have to figure out. You know, what does density mean? It means more people sharing in the cost. And we'll talk about it later on, but here's another example, and I think we have to kind of be aware as we're making these kind of decisions, these realms of decisions we have to make, so.
Thank you for that comment. Any other comments from council members? All right, we've got a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 2020-11, thanks to Member Brindle, which would approve the preliminary and final plat with variances at 4625 Lexington Avenue. Any further discussion? All those in favor of passing the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. There you go. Well, good luck with everything. And it's nice to know you're going to stay in the neighborhood and live on one side of it. Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda. And we've moved some things around on that portion of the agenda. So we're going to have a presentation by Director Milner with respect to proposed Resolution 2020-111, which is the Prospect Knolls A Neighborhood Roadway Reconstruction Improvement BA 458. We discussed this matter in December, and there were some concerns raised by council. Our staff went back to work to try to look at some other ideas that might be helpful, and they're back in front of us this evening with those ideas. So, Director Milner.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Yep, we're back with Prospect Knolls neighborhood. I wanted to frame it up that first is we just provided some options in the report of what fits within the existing street assessment policy. We didn't look outside the policy of different funding mechanisms, anything of those sort. We feel that's a bigger discussion that should be done at a future work session if that's the direction of the council. So the options we're going to review are just two that we think fit within the current policy. So a little background on the project, just to refresh your memories. This is the project area roughly from 70th Street to Dewey Hill Road. 91 properties, 1.6 miles of road. The streets were originally constructed between 1958 and 1986. Street widths vary from 23 feet to 30 feet wide. The pavement condition index, the average out in this neighborhood is 16 compared to our citywide average of 72. This is what we reviewed at the December 9th public hearing. At that time, we had 2 different assessment districts. Assessment District 1 was the bigger middle portion of the project area. And then we had a District 2, which was Shannon Drive and Dublin Circle. And the estimated assessments for District 1 was $32,900, and for District 2 was $18,500. You heard public testimony from 14 property owners, and then you did close the public hearing, and like you mentioned, tabled a decision at a later date, and that's why we're here tonight. So we did look at these kind of 6 options. Options 1 and 2. Option 1 is bid the original with modified assessments, and option 2 is a reduction in the roadway scope. Aaron will review those details after this slide. I'll just touch on the other 4. So we did discuss an possible option of doing those market benefit letters for each individual property and seeing what each individual property could support from an assessment standpoint. That's not what our current policy does today, so again, we felt like if that's something we wanted to do, that'd be a later, bigger discussion, and it could result in assessments much larger than $32,900, which I think that was kind of the issue, was the value of the assessment, not necessarily a market benefit test. We could do nothing, no build. We would, if that happens, we would still do pavement, pothole patching and stuff like that and just try to continue to keep that street going along. We think something needs to be done on that infrastructure, and that's why we're presenting number 1 and 2. We could maintain the existing, and when we say maintain, we mean like a mill and overlay. But the pavement is in such bad shape on the majority of this neighborhood that we can't support a mill and overlay. So option 5 we really don't think is an option. And then option 6, we could delay it 2 years and bid it with the neighboring, the Prospect Knowles C district, and do it as one assessment district. We don't think that, again, is an equitable assessment method, because the smaller properties on the east are now subsidizing the larger properties on the west. So we don't think that's a real good way to do it. If we did delay it and put it together, we would still have 2 separate districts in this area. It really doesn't solve our bigger problem. So with that, I'll hand it over to Aaron to just go through kind of the options that we would like to have you guys discuss tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Director Milner.
Thank you, Chad.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to continue this presentation. As Chad mentioned, I'm going to go through in more detail options 1 and 2. The first option is to complete the original option. By original, we mean the December 9th public hearing option with a slightly reduced estimated assessments. Again, District 1 was the majority of the project area, excluding Dublin Circle and the east leg of Shannon Drive. District 2 was Dublin Circle and the east leg of Shannon Drive. So completing the original option with slightly reduced assessments, $29,300 for District 1 per REU and $15,000 per REU for District 2. Those reductions were due to reduced contingency in both District 1 and 2. It did include reducing the restoration amount slightly, primarily in District 1, as well as adjusting the total REU in the districts by 1. That was the property noted here, 5912 Lee Valley Road on December 9th. That was in District 1. This proposal will show it in District 2. It's more continuous with this east leg of Shannon Drive segment. So we are aware that the Council was not in favor of the December 9th $32,900 assessment option. We did want to present that option as a comparison, since that is the standard street section that we do hope has the 50-year design life. Of course, the pros are that longer design life and the cons are the higher assessment amount. Option 2 is completing the project with modified assessment amounts of $24,500 per REU for District 1 and $15,000 per REU for District 2. That relates to reduced contingency in both districts from 15 to 10%. Again, a reduction of restoration area, primarily in District 1, as well as adjusting the total RUs in the district by 1. Again, that's the 5912 Lee Valley property into District 2. The primary difference in those assessment rates is due to essentially a substandard street section, which I'll describe in more detail. Substandard section would be reclamation of the existing asphalt pavement and the gravel base. That's essentially recycling this black top component and the gray gravel base component, creating a recycled product. Performing a stability test on that recycled aggregate product. If that stability test passes, then the soils shown in the light brown stay in place as they are today. If that stability test fails, replacing a portion or all of this light brown section here. Relative to the standard street reconstruction, that stability test is typically done on this darker brown area down underneath here. So kind of a deeper stability test. That's the difference between the substandard and the standard. The other substandard component is no concrete curb and gutter. And the majority of this project area does not have curb and gutter today. The other component, 4 inches of asphalt pavement. That's the same thickness of asphalt pavement in our standard street section. Little to no restoration, so we want to do our best with the substandard option to not touch any of the green space. This option, we do anticipate a reduction of street life span. We don't know exactly what that reduction would be. The reduction of the assessment amount is approximately 20% difference between the standard and the substandard. That doesn't necessarily mean 20% reduction in street life. You know, soils are kind of a difficult to estimate. So it's kind of an art dealing with soil. So it's very difficult to estimate what that lifespan reduction would be. Potential assessments, District 1, again, District 1 is the majority of the project area, excluding Dublin Circle and the east leg of Shannon Drive. There's 61 properties, factoring in the partial REUs for corner lots. We've got an equivalent 58.17 REUs. The REUs essentially, again, are single-family homes, regardless of lot area or the front footage. Factoring in the roadway project cost divided by the 58.17 REUs, we get for option 1, again, that's the standard street section, $29,300 per REU. And the option 2, the substandard section, $24,500. These two options, again, still do include the 10% contingency. District 2, again, Dublin Circle and the east leg of Shannon Drive, there's 30 properties, 30 REUs, dividing taking the roadway project cost divided by the 30 REUs, we get $15,000 per REU for option 1, which is the standard street section. Again, 10% contingency included in that number. This slide here is a reference slide only for the assessment amounts for the 2 districts and the 2 options. Total assessment amount, an annual estimated assessment amount per REU, assuming that we're rolling over the assessment onto property taxes and spreading it out over 15 years per our standard policy, and the monthly estimated assessment per REU if you spread it out over the 15 years per month. So District 1, option 1, the standard street section, $29,300 assessment per REU, annual assessment amount $2,652, and a monthly estimated assessment per REU $221. Assessment District 1, option 2, again the substandard street section, Assessment amount per REU, $24,500. An annual assessment per REU, $2,217. And a monthly estimated assessment per REU, $185. Finally, Assessment District 2, Option 1, the Standard Street section, assessment per REU, $15,000. Annual estimated assessment amount, $1,358. And then the monthly estimated assessment per REU, $113 per month. Those assume 4% finance charge if it's spread out over the standard 15 years per the policy. So that's going to conclude the presentation. We welcome feedback on either the 2 options or any of the 6 options for that matter. So if the council does wish to proceed with the project, it'd be option 1 or 2 for District 1 and option 1 for District 2. So thank you for the time, and we welcome questions from the council.
Member Fisher?
So I apologize, I wasn't able to be here for the special meeting several weeks ago, and this probably came up, but there's nothing unique or special about these streets in terms of linear foot costs compared to other areas we've done before, is there?
There's not, no. It's strictly the number of REUs or properties we're able to divide the total cost by. So it's a density question.
Okay. Thank you.
I had one other preliminary question, then I want to just make a few comments here right off the bat. You had mentioned that you didn't think it would be appropriate to include curb and gutter, but that's not a cost we usually assess to a residence anyway. That's something that's paid out of the utility fund. So I'm wondering if you could comment on why you thought curb and gutter would not be appropriate. Is it because of the nature of the proposed method of construction or type of construction? Substandard versus standard, or what is it?
Very good question. So it's true, concrete curb and gutter is not an assessed item. It's a stormwater utility fund item. However, the restoration behind the concrete curb and gutter, so if you look at this graphic, the green space back here, those are assessed costs, the topsoil, the seed, driveways are assessed, irrigation repairs. Those items behind the curb and gutter are assessed items.
Okay. All right. Now, I know that substandard is probably an engineering term, but it has a terrible connotation for people that think,
Slight
oh yeah,
discount, you can get something really crappy.
Let's do it let's do it this way. Let's do it the Edina way. Let's do it the substandard way. No, that's not the way we do it. We do it the standard way here. We do it, the right way. And I would say that I really appreciate after our December meeting, your department trying to come up with, under our existing structure, our existing policy, ways to do this project. But what lingers for me is the notion that when we had the meeting in December and we talked about what these prospective assessments could be without these new options, that for me personally, it was kind of a tipping point. I thought, okay, it's time to have a policy discussion about what direction are we heading here, and what are some of the alternative methods that we could explore with, excuse me, with regard to financing street reconstruction projects that we might not otherwise have already explored. I know we talked about sales tax, but it just struck me that we were at the point in time where we should push the pause button on this project like we did on Birchcrest B. That's a little bit different basis there for holding the project off. That we should not do this, but what we should do is put people in our town to work. What I'd like to have you guys do is figure out what kind of a structure we ought to have for a task force of citizens and technical people that would look at some potential alternative sources of funding for street reconstruction projects. And I think it ought to be composed of people that have experienced special assessments, people that are prospective recipients of special assessments, and, you know, try to get a broad range of knowledge. And I kind of would leave it up to the department to come up with these ideas of how to populate, how large it ought to be and how you ought to populate it. But we need a 4-4 vote with Member Staunton out with a medical issue tonight. We need a unanimous vote on this thing. And I told Manager Neal this afternoon I couldn't support it, and I think you're going to hear from other council members as well on this issue. But I just feel like the time has come for us to take a long, hard look at this and get our citizens engaged in the process of how we look at it, so that it's not a top-down determination. It's a ground-up determination. And people in our town get together and say, okay, we realize these costs are getting more and more expensive, but let's try to figure out a different way to do this. We've got a lot of smart people in our town that can figure out how to deal with some of these issues. So my notion would be that we get to work on that. You know, that we've put a task force together and we start looking at alternative ways to do this. And I know Member Fisher told me he had a couple of comments he wanted to make, and I think Member Brindle and Member Anderson do as well. Member Fisher.
I'd like to hear from the council members that were here for that last meeting before I...
Member Anderson.
Thank you. You know, since that assessment meeting, I've been troubled by this. And the most important point I want to make, though, is I want to thank you guys for going to work on this so quickly and coming back with good alternatives. And what you struggled with is creating alternatives working within our existing policy. You know, and as the mayor mentions, maybe it's time to rethink that. It's, you know, a lot of emails have come in, a lot of opinions stated. What I notice is the prevailing sentiment is one of fairness. Is it fair to do it this way? Is it fair to do it that way? Our policy says that the assessed homeowner will receive a benefit from the completion of the improvement, and in this case, it's necessary. So that it does have to go forward at some point in time. The last thing I want to say, though, is that no matter how we do it, a task force, if it's created, whatever we do, it's still ultimately, it's going to be levied debt, whether it's spread out over a larger group or spread out over the whole tax levy. And I think that the taxpayer needs to know that and understand that as well. So whatever special arrangement we make, it may be that this particular group of properties is assessed less, and that may be the fair thing to do. At the same time, the real cost will still be incurred. And so however it works out, I'll pay a little more, somebody else will pay a little more. I'm okay with that, by the way, if it comes to that. But I do think that people need to understand that it's not simply a matter of this is too much, so it goes to the black hole. There is no black hole. We all have to pay a little bit more. But thank you for your hard work. All right,
before we go to Member Brindle, I'm going to Manager Neal had his hand up.
Thank you, Your Honor, members of council. You suggested a task force. We have, Mr. Mayor, we have a process of putting together task forces, putting together scoping documents and descriptions of how they're populated and so on. And if that is the direction you go, we'll work with the city engineer and the admin department to put something together and bring it back to you for a look.
All right, thank you. Member Brindle.
Thank you. So this project presented some philosophical challenges for me with District 1 and District 2. And that continues to be a question for me. We have a project that was just completed that we had 3 not connected areas of our city, and each was quite different from the other, but we weren't different districts. So, and as I look at how the assessment is measured, it isn't measured by how much curb you have. It's measured by, it's assumed that everybody's going to generate about the same number of trips. And that's how our assessment policy and the whole process is based, is trip generation rather than how much curb you have. And so that's been the biggest challenge for me so far in this, is just kind of getting comfortable with 2 different districts when trip generation is trip generation. But further, I think the big thing for me is we haven't done what we said we were going to do, and that is look at alternatives for where is it that we can devise some more creative funding ideas, if you will, and we've received some from the neighbors. And we appreciate that. But of course, we can only be together when we're in a meeting like this. So we haven't been together to discuss this since December 9th. And so that's what I think we need to do, is dedicate some time to be together as a group and really discuss this fully. The alternatives that you provide for us this evening are definitely going to be with us and part of the discussion, but really what we said we were going to do, we haven't had time to do. And that is from a funding perspective to really look at if this is the direction our assessments are going to go, and that is up. We are going to be having this tough discussion with neighborhoods going forward because everything is just, it's not going to be any cheaper. And there are some neighborhoods that are not dense at all that are going to be reconstructed in the near future. So I do think it's a discussion that needs to happen, and it will inform us and I think benefit Prospect Knolls, but it will also inform us and prepare us for what we've got coming. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. Member Fisher?
So I wanted to go last just to see, I think it's important to get the thoughts from the folks that were here at that previous meeting. So I've read all the emails, and clearly there was a message, people had sort of expectations coming out of that meeting that, and I do want to thank staff for what you put together here. I think they're good options, and I'm sorry I joked about your term substandard. I know from an engineering perspective, that's exactly the right word, but it's not a great sales word. Maybe it's standard light, I don't know. But what I gleaned from the emails is that people were hoping that there'd almost be more brainstorming, and I think that's what is being proposed here, is this opportunity to put a lot of smart people in a room and talk about some of these ideas, both short-term and long-term. By the way, while I'm talking, can you put up that diagram again from this area? That one. But one thing I want to disavow people of is this idea. Some of the emails were talking about who's driving on whose streets to get to their homes. And believe it or not, that's not what this is about at all. It really, when these decisions, at least as I understand it, when these decisions are made, it's not what route you're taking. It's how much infrastructure is required to be delivered to our homes. And that's road, and it's all the stuff underneath those streets, right? Those utilities all have a cost. So when we talk about density, and there was a point I was trying to make earlier, when you look at this diagram and look at the far right, the density of those blocks, and that's a lot of Edina is closer to that density. Those folks have much less expensive infrastructure costs. Now this is a true, this is like the prototypical suburban development here. It's beautiful, rolling hills, cul-de-sacs. I mean, it's lovely and it's great, but it's expensive. It's an expensive part of our city. And we're realizing the pain that causes. When you think about suburban development, it's mostly happened in the 50s through the 70s, and clearly that's the case in Edina. And so for the first time in our lives, we're having to re-up the infrastructure in our community. We're finding that it's kind of expensive. But it's not just us, it's across the whole country. We're learning that this pattern of development is expensive. And we go back to the comprehensive plan in 2008, we recognized that, and we said, we love our neighborhoods in Edina, and we don't want to mess these up. We want to have this kind of opportunity for people to live here. So we're going to increase density in very select areas, where we, say this, let's use the Southdale area as an example, where, we're going to have conversations about apartment buildings where there are now big parking lots. And that's painful. People don't like that. But in the end, we have to find ways for the economics to work as our community moves to the next stage. And all of that has to be part of this conversation. Are we going to give up a little to have more density in those areas so we can keep our single-family neighborhoods the way they are and be able to pay for them long-term? And we're about halfway through replacing this infrastructure, and it's getting more painful. The costs are going up, and we're getting into some neighborhoods that are truly low-density neighborhoods. I can't imagine what it's going to be when we get to, Rolling Green, some of those. Man, that's going to be up there. So brainstorming, figuring out these solutions, I think is really important. I think having people be able to be part of that process is important. The only thing I would say is that when we throw those solutions on the table, the one thing, and I can't remember how many years this system has been in place, but it's been a while. Certainly through all of this, the most of this 50% that we've gotten done, right?
Yep.
This REU system. The thing I've always liked about it conceptually is that you pay for the density of the area you live in. So there are people that live in apartments in Edina that their cost is about $400 for the street in front of their living unit. And there are areas where it's been $10,000 or $8,000. And as the density drops, we're seeing these astronomical numbers. And it's not comfortable, and we have to figure that out. But when we get to a solution, whatever that solution is, there still has to be some component where you pay for the density for where you live. Because in my mind, it's like going to a restaurant with your friend, and one friend orders, 2 apps and a couple drinks, and then says, let's split the bill 50-50. At the end of the day, there should be some equity in that piece of it. But there is a tipping point. I read those emails and I get it. At some point, it just doesn't work. And we have to find those solutions. Mm-hmm. So, but we have to get to it because these streets aren't getting any better. All right, we have to replace them. We have to keep improving our community so it stays this great place with great neighborhoods.
One follow-on comment I would have is with respect to the existing system and a potential departure from it. We've had a lot of folks in our community that have already paid a special assessment. As Member Fisher said, about half the streets are done. That means about half the people in our town have already paid a significant special assessment. As we go about the process, at least in my mind, of looking at alternative methods to finance street reconstruction projects that are yet to be done, we can't lose sight of the fact that other people have already paid for the street that they live on, and now we're theoretically asking them to help pay for streets that they don't live on that haven't been done yet, if we change the methodology. So I think everybody up here and everybody in our town is going to be sensitive to the idea that don't forget about those folks who have already paid under another method if indeed we do decide to switch to some variation of what we're doing now. And that's yet to be determined, of course, but we need to make sure that, as we've talked about before, that there's a soft landing for people that have already paid a significant amount of money to improve their streets. It is an interesting time to be alive and living in Edina when all this infrastructure ages out and we just all happen to be living here, at the time. Lucky us. And so to me, this is really, in a way, an interesting problem to work on, an interesting challenge for our whole town, because I think it'll spur people's creative thinking. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got so many bright, capable people in our town. I think we might come up with some pretty interesting ideas that we can share with each other and then collectively decide. And the council will have to make the final call on this, but how we want to do this in the future. So that means you're going to have to find something else to do with your time. You guys,
got plenty to do.
I think there's plenty to do, and as I recall, in the engineering department, there's lots of activity going on,
Yep.
and so if we don't pass Resolution 2020-111, which I know we're not going to do that because
Yep.
you've heard the comments from everybody. we'll just wait to hear from staff. And your department, I think, is really crucial to this whole thing, is the technical expertise that you have in helping guide our neighbors based on all the experience you've had redoing half the town is really going to be invaluable. And then how we populate the rest of it, I think, is start thinking that through. At least that's my idea, and I don't know, are other people comfortable with that idea? Yes. Yeah, with that sort of citizen-led, technical, staff-guided effort. We've done that in other areas that we needed to have things done in, and including the comp plan. It was just a product of the residents in our town. So I think that's what we have coming up next. And I hope the folks in Prospect Knolls will step up and volunteer to be help us think this through and make decisions that are good for everybody. So thanks for all of you coming tonight, and a Happy New Year again to all of you. It's a happier New Year, I think. So, all right. Thank you, folks, and thank you, staff.
Mr. Mayor, we were just talking with the city attorney. We would recommend that you take an action on that proposed item, just so that we close this process out. And it's
is there a motion to deny Resolution 2020-111?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second. And a bit of discussion, because this resolution is 2019-111.
Well, now in my on my computer it's 2020-11, not 111.
I know, but then you're looking at a different resolution.
I'm looking at wait a minute.
It did start in 2019.
It did start in 2019.
Okay, hold on here.
That's the number on the resolution.
Yeah, you're right. Member Brindle. You're 2 for 2. 2 for 2. That's amazing. So it's last year.
It is last year.
It's old stuff.
That's right.
So we got a motion and a second to deny Resolution 2019-111. Any further discussion? All those in favor of denying Resolution 2019-111, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. All right. Thanks, folks. Thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing you downstream here as we get to work on this. Thank you. And next before us is the dockless bicycle and scooter sharing pilot program update. Mr. Scipione has this for us. Andrew Scipione, Transportation Planner, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. So tonight, what I'm planning to do is just kind of give a brief overview of kind of why the city began this pilot program to begin with. Give an overview of what we saw occur during this pilot program, what the trip data we received, or experienced rather, some of the common concerns that were voiced by residents, and then get to staff's recommendations. So when we talk about scooter and bike sharing, kind of a shorthand term you'll hear me use is micromobility. And micromobility is something that is a relatively recent trend in the transportation industry. And from Edina's perspective, well, really in every city, micromobility is seen as an opportunity to advance several different goals in the realm of transportation. Some of them here I have listed from our own transportation chapter of our comprehensive plan. So among those, micromobility has the capacity to improve mobility to our users, to allow us to implement a fully multimodal transportation system, to minimize the environmental impacts of transportation, to reduce overall dependency on single occupancy vehicles, and to support connections to transit service. So with those goals in mind, the City of Edina in 2018 began this pilot program by entering into a memorandum of understanding with Lime to allow them to operate micromobility services within the City of Edina. That began on June 1st of that year. The bikes were not deployed until July of that year. At the time, the industry was heavily focused on dockless bike sharing and then transitioned into scooters, which I'll get into later on. Toward the end of that year, Lime expressed interest in expanding their fleet to include scooters. So a small fleet of scooters was deployed in the end of September of that year. All of the devices were collected by mid-November, and that MOU expired at the end of the year. So because we had a limited observation window in 2018, staff recommended that we continue the pilot program for another year so that we could get really a full season of data to see what micromobility would actually mean for the city. At the same time, the rising popularity of e-scooters, both regionally and nationally, led to an industry shift away from dockless bikes and toward the dockless scooters or the e-scooters. Council renewed the MOU with Lime in March of last year, which allowed for Lime to deploy both scooters and bicycles. However, at that time, in keeping with the industry trend, Lime had expressed their interest or their intent to only deploy e-scooters for 2019. So we saw the scooters deployed in mid-June, and we saw a large increase in usage in 2019 compared to 2018, and I'll go over the numbers a little bit later on here. In addition, there were several more complaints received by city staff for reasons that I'll get into later on. One of those complaints was related to safety, specifically in the Centennial Lakes and the Promenade area, where we have high pedestrian usage. Because of those complaints, staff directed Lime to install a geofence over that area, and that's what this picture is showing. The red areas are areas essentially where Lime has agreed not to deploy scooters anymore and where users are not able to end their scooter trips. So if they leave a scooter or a bike there, they're continually being charged for that trip. In 2019, that geofence went into effect in early October. All of the devices were collected in late October, and that MOU is currently still in effect, and it expires in March of this year. March 19th, sorry. So reviewing the trip data, this is 2018 first. So the green line represents the bikes, which were deployed first, as I mentioned, and then the black line represents the scooters. So in July, you can see the first increase in the bike deployment, or the bike trip as they were deployed in late July. The scooters introduced in late September, and their use exceeded the bikes in less than a month. And at the same time, the bike ridership declined dramatically after the scooters were introduced. According to Lime's data, the bike ridership went from 14 trips a day on average to 4 trips a day. And then this next graph here will show 2018 compared to 2019. So 2019 shows the scooter data in the gray line. So as I mentioned, the scooters were deployed toward the end of June, and by July they had already outperformed scooters from the previous year. By the end of the year, we had about 4,500 trips, which is about 4 times the number of scooter trips that we experienced the previous year. So this is just a quick summary of kind of comparing the 3 different segments of our pilot program. So we have the bike data from 2018, the scooter data from 2018, and then the scooter data from 2019. So some things I wanted to highlight here. Throughout the course of this pilot, we had just under 11,000 trips received, and over 7,000 of those trips were received last year. In addition, I wanted to highlight the difference between the bikes and the scooters when it comes to average number of trips per week. Double digits for the bikes, but triple digits for the scooters. In addition, I wanted to point out the total trip length that we received. So just under 19,000 miles were taken on scooters and e-bikes over the course of this 2-year period, which, if you do the math like I did, works out to every public street in the city of Edina being ridden on 81 times. And you can see the 13,000 miles that were taken just as previous year, which equals every public street in the city of Edina 60 times. So now I wanted to talk about some of the existing regulations that relate to micromobility for the state and for the city. So bikes by state statute are permitted on roadways. So this includes dockless bikes. They're permitted on roadways, bike lanes, and trails. The e-scooters by state statute are prohibited on sidewalks. State statute also requires that e-scooter operators be 16 or 12 years of age or older. And if they're between the ages of 12 and 17, they're required to wear protective headgear. Per city code, bikes are permitted on the sidewalk with certain restrictions. They're required to slow down to a walking speed when they're near pedestrians and when they're at driveways or intersections. And our city code currently has no language to address e-scooter use, so we're forced to rely on the state statute language. Within Lime's user agreement, they have some additional restrictions, so they advise users to obey the applicable local laws. They recommend helmet use to their operators of bikes and e-scooters. They say that they set the limit at 16 years of age or older for users of non-electric bikes. And then for the e-scooters and the e-bikes, they require that operators be 18 years of age or older. So one thing we noticed we realized during the course of this experiment was, or this pilot period rather, was that Edina, in my opinion, has insufficient infrastructure at this time to accommodate this type of micromobility service. I'm particularly talking about the e-scooters, because by state statute they're not permitted on sidewalks. They're required to be ridden on the road or where there are designated bike facilities. You can see the map here showing our existing bike facilities, and while we have made significant strides over the last 10 years to improve this system, it is still a little lacking compared to bigger cities like Portland or Minneapolis, and it is still somewhat of a fragmented system. So users who are operating on a roadway that doesn't have a bike facility are going to tend to look for an opportunity to ride where they're separated from motor vehicle traffic. And in almost every case, that means biking on or using the scooter on a sidewalk, which is restricted by state statute. So in Lime's usage reports for the 2 years, they reported just under 100 complaints received in that 2-year period, which they describe as acceptably low. Of those complaints, about 70% were related to parking of vehicles. Within that 70%, about half of them were what they call founded complaints, and half were unfounded, which I'll get into a little later. About 10% of those complaints were related to broken or damaged vehicles, and then another 20% of those complaints were actually more comments of people complaining about lack of availability of devices or expressing desire for more devices in their neighborhood. It's difficult for city staff to quantify the total number of complaints that we received over the course of this 2-year pilot, because they were received from a number of different departments: engineering, public works, parks and rec, the police department. But generally speaking, staff from all of these departments would agree that the number of complaints received increased in 2019 compared to 2018. So getting into the parking complaints that Lime received, so the two categories that they break them down into are what they call founded complaints and unfounded complaints. So these are examples of founded complaints, or what I would call justified complaints. And these are complaints that, these are instances where the parking of the device violates a term of our MOU. So from these examples, you can see the devices are either obstructing travel on a sidewalk, a bike lane, or a street. They're obstructing access to a building, they're blocking sight lines at an intersection, or they're being leaned against a pole or other structures. The other category of parking complaints are what they call unfounded complaints. These are devices that are parked in compliance with our memorandum of understanding. Some examples include being parked adjacent to a sidewalk without blocking the pedestrian access, being parked in the boulevard areas within, as long as they're on public right-of-way, that's permitted, and just in general vehicles parked in single-family residential areas. So the common concerns we received, I generally kind of lump into these 3 different categories. So on the safety side, we received a number of concerns from residents about users that failed to use protective headgear, failure to yield to pedestrians, failure to obey traffic laws. There were reports of underage users, and then reports of vehicles parked that are obstructing pedestrian walkways. The other category of complaints is the usage. So we don't yet have a heat map, unfortunately, showing the usage in 2019. I have one for 2018, which I'll show later on. But anecdotally, based on the complaints that we received, the usage that we experienced in 2019, in our opinion, is mostly recreational. given that a lot of the complaints were seen in Centennial Lakes, in the Promenade, and along the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail. So in staff's opinion, the scooters within the last 2 years were generally used more as a novelty rather than as they were intended to be an alternative mode of transportation, replacing single occupancy vehicles or providing connections to transit or to jobs, that kind of thing. The last category of complaints are just aesthetics. We learned that there are residents that dislike looking out their front window and seeing a scooter parked in the boulevard, even if it's legally parked, if it's not blocking the street, not blocking the sidewalk. And we received a number of complaints over the last 2 years about such devices being legally parked but still being considered as litter or littering. So based on all of that, staff at this time is recommending not renewing our agreement with Lime for another year and continuing our current memorandum of understanding to expire in March. We do not expect at this time that Lime is going to deploy more devices between now and March. Again, the current demand in Edina is relatively low. It's less than 70% trips per capita than Minneapolis, our neighbor. At this time, it's my opinion that micromobility services don't currently provide a benefit to Edina. As I said before, the use seems to be primarily recreational rather than as a replacement for single occupancy vehicles. And there seems to be insufficient resident support to continue micromobility services at this time. Again, primarily given the safety concerns that we received and the aesthetic concerns. So I presented these findings to the Transportation Commission at their last meeting. They were generally supportive of staff's recommendations. Some comments they had, they noted that other modes likely don't want to share space with the scooters, so there's some competing interests within the right-of-way. Vehicles tend to not want them on the roadway, and pedestrians tend to not want them on the sidewalk, so that leaves a question of where should they go. They also suggested that, or commented that a heat map of the usage could be useful for the city in prioritizing infrastructure improvements, building bike facilities where it's legal for these kind of devices to operate. And they also generally inquired about what statistics are out there showing to what degree these kind of devices replace single occupancy vehicles. And there's limited data out there. I've done some research and I've generally found it in the range of 5 to 30% reduction. That 30% reduction being the much higher populated cities like Minneapolis or Portland, for example. So this is an example. This is the heat map that we have of the 2018 usage. So you can see where trips on the scooters or the bikes were taken. The darker red colors are areas of higher use. So you can see the areas of highest use would be Southdale, Park Lawn, our commercial areas, which we expected, but as well as Centennial Lakes, the Promenade. You can see a big dark red line going across where the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail is, and then a dark red area along Pamela Park as well. And I think it's important to note that many of these areas either already have bicycle infrastructure or are slated for future bicycle infrastructure per our Ped and Bike Master Plan. So while I'm recommending that the city doesn't continue authorizing micromobility services at this time, I think it's important to note that these services are expected to continue in our neighboring communities as well as nationally. These devices are very popular, and I don't expect that this trend is going to decline necessarily anytime soon. So I think the city should still be taking steps to address this issue in the future when it comes back. Among those things I would recommend is that the city should continue to monitor local administrative and regulatory practices. We should continue to monitor regional and national trends in micromobility. And we should continue to implement bicycle infrastructure improvements that are recommended in the Ped and Bike Master Plan, because those are areas where the scooters are legally allowed to operate. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Member Fisher.
So I'm a little surprised that, I guess I am surprised and I'm not surprised by the findings in sort of the Centennial Lakes, promenade area that, there's a lot of joy riding around and scooters. But one of my comments as I was reading through my packet and reading your recommendations, and from a citywide perspective, I can't disagree with your recommendations. I mean, there's just not enough density, not enough, the neighborhoods are too vast and it's not making sense, and probably won't ever, because those are areas of our community where it's just not built for that. But I think about that whole Southdale area, and the areas adjacent to it where, apartments are being built, there's higher density, and we have, a major transit hub. And I imagine an environment even today where you get off a bus at the transit hub and, you have some groceries, you have whatever, but you could jump on a scooter and take it 4 blocks or 5 blocks or 8 blocks to wherever you live. Without a lot of the problems we identified, scooters in someone's front yard and all of that. So I imagine an environment where that could somehow work if we were to regulate that. But then I was a little disappointed when you were talking about the looping around Centennial Lakes. It's sort of the opposite of that. Any thoughts about that potential?
I guess I would just kind of go back to my point that a number of residents expressed a disinterest in having scooters parked in their residential areas. So while we did see the majority of the deployment of the scooters was in that Southdale area, if, in your example, a user were to get off a bus, get on a scooter, and take that scooter to their home, which is likely in a single-family residential area, that means that scooter, that device, is going to just be parked in a boulevard area where someone else may not necessarily want to see that scooter parked. And I think until we have a better understanding of what the residents' appetite is for those kind of situations, then we'll be better prepared to kind of address that.
And maybe I should have made my point clear, because you're right. What I was thinking in my mind is that you geo-fence the whole Southdale district, but instead of trying to keep them out, you try to keep them in. Because what we did is we had geo-fenced off the promenade and the Centennial Lakes loop because people were joyriding in there, when in fact, if we geo-fence that whole district, as it builds up and more people are living there and hopefully using the transit, you don't let the scooters go way out into the neighborhoods. But that's what, I guess it'll be interesting if we're going to need more data over time to determine how many people are using our transit that live, are they walking into the single family neighborhoods? How do we keep people entirely out of their cars in that realm, right? And we're not going to solve it today, but I think there's going to be a point where we're going to want to look at that. So I'm okay with the recommendation, but I think a few years from now, we might want to study that a little closer about how we could use these as a vehicle to get people to that transit hub.
Commissioner Fisher, if I may, I think a lot of the complaints that we heard from around Centennial Lakes in particular were pedestrians, they were senior citizens, and they were afraid. I mean, they were really concerned with getting injured by somebody running into them, and that kind of thing has been happening nationwide with the scooters. So it's not an irrational fear in any sense, and you're not saying that, I know, but that part of it was something really that was important. It wasn't just the number, it was the intensity of the complaints.
Okay. Member Brindle.
Well, I had the pleasure of visiting with a group of 7th graders who were working on a project. And their project was actually e-scooters and micromobility and kind of looking at how to do this. And they were going to devise an app that, in order to be able to use an e-scooter, you had to go through some training. And you couldn't get the app to get the scooter until you finished the training. And so it was pretty inspired, actually. And what I learned in that discussion, too, is that on a regular basis, looking at the high school and Valley View Middle School and Southview Middle School, e-scooters and e-bikes, Lime bikes were there. And the kids were using them to get to school. So there was some of that. But truly, looking at a major metropolitan city, and how the e-scooters are used in Denver, and how the e-scooters are used in downtown Minneapolis, there is a definite role, and they are filling a need with getting people from one meeting to another down Nicollet Mall or whatever it might be. And we just don't have enough of that to make them make sense here. But at the same time, I think we've put our toe in the water. We've gotten an idea of what they are and how people use them. And our day will come, I think. And I think, too, that their product and how it functions will come as well. But we aren't Minneapolis. We aren't that major city that people hop from one place to another. And they took transit to get there in the first place. So that is how they get around during the day. So I agree with your assessment and your recommendation. But I do think that it's something that it's good, as you say, to keep an eye on other cities and how they're being utilized.
Thank you. Member Anderson.
Thank you. I too agree with your assessment and your recommendation. What I've become sensitized to in the use of the e-scooters is the safety issues. That's what I note the most. I see a lot of young people. I think I picked up in your presentation that Lime was recommending that 18 was it 18?
Correct.
Yeah. So that would actually rule out a large portion of our existing ridership here. So, at this time, I think Member Fisher may be onto something in that in some limited areas and some capacity there may be a future use, and it's entirely possible. Not right now. But so thank you for your hard work on this.
Thank you. Do we know the average? You've got so much data here. Do you have any data on the average age of the e-scooter rider now?
In Edina or nationally?
In Edina or either way?
I don't.
Okay.
Oh.
All right. And as you look around at other cities for data over time, because that it's quite a lovely term, that micromobility, and if you can figure out how to make it work in your community without some of the concerns that we have with respect to safety, with respect to aesthetics, usage. Do you have any data that deals with cities that use docked systems only as opposed to dockless, which would get at the aesthetic issue, I think, that has been a concern to some of our residents?
I guess, what specific kind of data are you curious about?
In cities where they only allow the use of bicycles or scooters that have a docking system that they have to be taken out of or replaced into, do they have the same types of complaints that we're getting from residents? You could see where there still might be a concern about safety, but the aesthetic part of it may be lessened in terms of the level of complaints. I'm not sure about the usage category that you were talking about, but that was at least one other thing I thought might be worth looking at. It'd be communities that have had dockless and now have gone to docked, or have only had docked, because it all started with docked vehicles and then went to dockless, which seemed like it made some sense to go dockless, but maybe in some circumstances it makes sense to have, like if you're going to try to do it in a defined area and you had pathways for them that were dedicated, for example, it still might make more sense to have a docking system that they would be placed into or taken from, so you don't get into this aesthetic violation category. But regardless, I think it's worth taking a look at. In Santa Monica, I think you'll find a wealth of information. become known as Scooter Town, and listening to the mayor there talk about all the troubles they've had with especially health-related issues, head injuries. It's data worth looking at carefully as we go about assessing whether there'll be a time in the future when we think we would want to return to the use of these devices and offer this micro-mobility type of transportation. But in the meantime, I join my colleagues in adopting your recommendation that we not renew the contract with Lime when it expires the end of March. So I think you're looking for a motion to that effect, I would think.
Yes, please.
All right, is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Got a motion second to adopt the staff's recommendation to discontinue authorization of dockless bicycle and scooter sharing services with Lime, effective the termination date of the contract. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And then, Mr. Scipione, you have the other matter left on this portion of the agenda too, which is the West 72nd Street pedestrian safety assessment that was done with the residents in that neighborhood.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor. So with this project, again, I'll provide a brief background on how this project was initiated, talk about how we developed this concept for this trial, talk a little bit about our public participation process, our approach for studying these intersections, go over the survey and the data that we collected, and then present our recommendations. So over the years, staff has received several concerns from residents in the South Cornelia neighborhood about pedestrian safety, particularly on 72nd Street at these intersections, Cornelia Drive and Oaklawn Avenue. These are both all-way stop intersections, Oaklawn a three-way and Cornelia a four-way stop. This section of roadway is immediately south of Cornelia Elementary School. So the goal of this project was to determine if intersection improvements are warranted, if they would be effective at improving pedestrian safety in this for this stretch. And among the common complaints that we receive from residents along this stretch are concerns about vehicle speeds and concerns about poor stop sign compliance at these two intersections. So given those two complaints, staff proposed to look at implementing temporary curb extensions at these intersections. So curb extensions, also referred to as bump outs, they're features that physically narrow the roadways. They create shorter distances for pedestrians to cross, and they compel motorists to slow down as they drive through or as they navigate around them. And it's important to note that the city has implemented curb extensions previously in the city to varying degrees, generally as part of neighborhood street reconstruction projects. So if you recall, council approved a public participation proposal back in June for this project. We set the participation level at involve, which means we'll work directly with the public through the process to ensure that public concerns and aspirations are consistently understood and considered. And the question we decided to be answered was, do curb extensions improve pedestrian safety at the intersections of Cornelia Drive and or Oaklawn Avenue? So our approach was to run this in two different test scenarios for about 2 weeks each. The first scenario was to implement the curb extensions with temporary pavement markings, and the second was to augment those temporary pavement markings with delineators. The idea being to create more of a physical boundary in the hopes of increasing compliance. So during each test, we then collected feedback from residents through Better Together Edina surveys. We held pop-up meetings on site to collect in-person feedback that mimicked those online surveys. And then staff collected traffic data to evaluate the impact that these had on vehicle speeds and on stop sign compliance. So this is a larger image showing the general layout of these two intersections with the curb extensions. So the existing streets are about 30 feet wide, and with these curb extensions, they were narrowed to 20 to 21 feet wide. With the striping. That dimension was chosen because it's the most extreme that we would go with these curb extensions in order to provide adequate access for emergency vehicles. It was also chosen to mimic the previous instance where we've installed curb extensions, which would be in the Morningside A neighborhood along Sunnyside Road. So this configuration mimics those geometrics. These are some pictures showing what those pavement markings looked at. You can see the white lines there showing where the curb extensions would be relative to the all-way stops. And then here's showing what those intersections look like when the delineators were added. So as I mentioned, we had a project page on Better Together. We received about 1,100 site visits and varying degrees of participation among those users. In the end, we saw about 67 what we call engaged visitors. So that means 67 people that either participated in a survey or they post a question related to the project. In addition, at the pop-up meetings, the in-person engagement opportunities, we saw about 10 people participate in the surveys that were available at that time.
Can I ask you really quick, you talk about a pop-up meeting. How did you pop up and do this? Did you let people know? Did you just show up out there one day and stop people? How did that happen?
Good question. So as part of the proposal, we laid out a plan to hold these pop-up meetings. So we set dates for them, and we posted those dates on the Better Together website so that residents would know when and where staff was going to be. And that it was basically just me out there with a couple of easels that had these layout diagrams, some information on why we're conducting this test, and then boards that had the printed out surveys that residents could fill in person.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the survey results showed between the two tests, the survey we broke down to kind of two different categories. One, to look at what changes these had from the perspective of a pedestrian and a cyclist, and what changes they had from the perspective of a motorist. In general, the surveys showed a significant lack of support for permanently installing these pavement markings, or for permanently installing the curb extensions. The results showed some positive impact for pedestrians and cyclists, but generally reflected more negative impact on motorists. Some of the common concerns that were received through the surveys, residents felt that the curb extensions would make the intersections more dangerous than they currently are. A number of residents indicated that they felt snow and ice events at these narrowed intersections would create unsafe conditions. And then residents also noted that large vehicles would have difficulty navigating through these narrowed intersections. We also got some feedback from the school district, given the proximity to the school in this case, and given that it's an area that's heavily traveled by school buses. The school district noted that the narrowed intersections, similar to the residents, they noted that they're difficult for their bus drivers to traverse safely. And particularly, they have experienced this when another vehicle is parked or located at another leg of that intersection. And I have some pictures later on to kind of give you a better sense of what that looks like. An example that the school district cited was actually Sunnyside Road and Curve Avenue, which is pictured here, which was the template that we used in this test. At the same time, the school district recognized the intention of this project, the intention of the curb extensions, and they recognized the importance of protecting pedestrians and cyclists. But they would also request that be done in a manner that doesn't negatively impact their operations. So the traffic data was collected in 3 different locations in the middle of these 2 intersections, one to the east and one to the west. And again, what we collected were vehicle speeds at these 3 locations, and then at the 2 intersections, we used our traffic cameras to look at stop sign compliance. So with stop sign compliance, we broke down vehicles into 3 different categories. We assigned a vehicle either a full stop, a rolling stop, or a no stop. So on the speed data, this shows the 3 different count locations over the course of the trial. So you have the baseline in orange, test 1 in red, and test 2 in the beigeish color. Across the board, we really saw no significant reduction in vehicle speeds. There was a slight decrease on the east side of Cornelia, virtually no change at the other 2 locations. I think it's also important to note here that, as you can see, all of the observed 85th percentile speeds were under 30 miles an hour, which is the existing speed limit on the roadway. On the stop sign compliance, this is where we saw something that we weren't quite expecting to see. So looking at the baseline compared to test 2, we saw a dramatic decrease in the number of full stops. Before the trial, the stop sign compliance at Cornelia in this example was about 70%. By test 1, with the pavement markings, that dropped to 40%, and with the delineators, that dropped to 25%. At the same time, from the baseline to test 2, we saw a 40% increase in the rolling stops, with virtually no increase in, with a slight increase in vehicles that didn't stop at all between the 2 tests. Some of the possible reasons for this would be that particularly with the delineators may have caused some confusion among drivers and some distraction. So drivers may have been focused on trying to identify the reason for the delineators and may not necessarily have noticed the stop sign. At the same time, I think personally, I feel given the context of this roadway, the majority of the traffic is local traffic who I would assume are familiar with the all-way stops, but this is what the data showed us. On Oaklawn Avenue, we weren't able to get baseline data, unfortunately, but looking at the 2 tests here, you can see virtually no change between the 2 of them, and the rate of vehicles that completed a full stop is similar to the range for Cornelia in that 20 to 30% with the pavement markings and with the delineators. So these are some captures from our traffic camera at these 2 intersections. So you can see here with that 20 to 21 foot space, it does provide adequate space for 2 passenger vehicles to pass. It's definitely less comfortable than it is when it's 30 feet wide, but you can see here that it is possible. And then here's an example here's some captures showing a bus traveling through these intersections. So you can see if a vehicle were to be stopped at the stop sign right here, for example, it would be almost impossible for this bus to make that turn without having to wave the vehicle ahead first. So considering the resident input, the school district input, and the data we saw, staff does not recommend installing the permanent curb extensions. There are some items that we do recommend for future consideration. Among those, we recommend that the minimum roadway widths that are recommended by the Living Streets Plan be implemented when this area comes up for reconstruction in the future. In particular, Cornelia Drive, Oaklawn Avenue, and West 72nd Street are all categorized as local connectors, which means they'd be reconstructed down to a width of 24 feet compared to their existing 30 feet wide. We also recommend that facilities that are recommended by the Ped and Bike Master Plan and the Active Routes to School Plan within this neighborhood should be prioritized for implementation in an effort to improve pedestrian and cyclist safety. And staff recommends that we should consider additional engagement with this neighborhood to consider facilities that may not be recommended in that plan. For example, a number of residents through this process recommended a sidewalk on the south side of 72nd Street, which is currently not recommended in the plan. Some other recommendations: staff does not recommend installing dynamic display speed signs in this area, as all of the observed 85th percentile speeds were under 30 miles an hour. Staff doesn't recommend installing rectangular rapid flashing beacons until such time that the pedestrian volume warrants it based on our pedestrian crossing policy. Staff does not recommend increasing the speed limit on 70th Street as a means to reduce non-local traffic. This is a comment that was brought up by a few residents during this process. And in addition to that, residents brought up suggested lowering the speed limit on Cornelia or 72nd to 25 miles an hour. This is an item that that our department has on their work plan for 2019 to investigate speed limit reductions citywide and to make recommendations to council. So that is something we'll continue to pursue from a citywide perspective. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Member Brendel.
Thank you. So the the photograph of the school bus making the turn, if that street is reconstructed to 24 feet wide, wouldn't that problem happen? Where the school bus is trying to turn onto the street and there's a car at that stop sign. If the roadway is 24 feet wide, would the bus be able to make that turn?
It's possible. I would have to look at the geometrics to determine.
I think
we
it would
look at
be,
that at the time of the project.
Knowing what was intended with Sunnyside Road, but looking here at reality about how a large vehicle makes that turn, it makes me wonder if we need to rethink the width of our connector streets to make sure that those turns can be made safely. So,
I would guess
Go ahead.
The one comment I would kind of make in response to that is, if in that situation, if another vehicle were to be in conflict with the bus turning, and the bus, it may be that the bus has to stop and wave that vehicle through. So there's kind of somewhat of a traffic calming component to that, but it is also could be perceived as an inconvenience.
okay. All right, something to think about.
All right, other questions for Mr. Scipione on this matter? So you've got a lot of recommendations that were, I think, quite interesting. But the main recommendation you had tonight was that the council adopt your recommendation not to install permanent curb extensions at West 72nd Street and Cornelia Drive or Oaklawn Avenue.
That is correct, Mr. Mayor.
All right, is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We got a motion and a second to adopt staff's recommendation not to install permanent curb cut extensions at West 72nd Street and Cornelia Drive or Oaklawn Avenue. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Mr. Scipione, what do you want us to do with those other recommendations? Anything that you want to bring forward at a subsequent time, or what are you thinking?
At this time, all I can say, I guess, is this neighborhood is not currently on the city's 5-year plan for reconstruction. There are some pedestrian facilities that are on the work plan for the PAX project in the next coming years. And I'll be providing more information to that in next month as part of my PAX Fund annual report. So that's an opportunity for staff to do some additional engagement with the neighborhood on what other facilities might be warranted in that neighborhood. And then as far as the traffic safety component, any additional complaints that we receive from this neighborhood related to traffic safety will go through our standard traffic safety protocol.
All right, good. Thank you for those two very excellent reports that you gave us. Appreciate all your data-driven work. We've got one more matter in this portion of the agenda. Manager Neal has it, and it is a potential appointment of one of our residents to the Edina Housing Strategy Task Force. Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. Normally, this might be the kind of item that we would do as part of our consent agenda, and you did do a lot of reappointments to our standing boards and commissions tonight during the consent agenda. But because we had some discussion about this at our last meeting, I wanted to bring it back to you in this format. If you recall, at our last meeting, Councilmember Brindle raised the question about should we appoint someone to the vacant position that was created when one of the task force members resigned on December 1st. If you go back and look at the scoping documents that the council adopted for this task force back in June of 2019, you laid out how and under what circumstances you would staff a vacancy or fill a vacancy. And this particular vacancy fell outside of those parameters. But during that time period, we also made some decisions that essentially extended the lifespan of this task force. And so there was some interest, I think, in reappointing or filling this vacancy. If we were going to use our our regular protocol about how we fill vacancies with our regular boards and commissions, we would go to what we call the bench, and you prioritized a number of names on this bench. And when this happens at one of our standing boards and commissions, staff just have the discretion that you've granted us to pick up the first person that's on the bench and put them in the game. And so that's what we're proposing as the methodology for filling this vacancy. And the first person on the bench that you put on as first person on the bench is Steve Brown, and Steve is in the audience tonight. I approached Mr. Brown last week to lay out this possible opportunity for him if he was interested to accept your appointment to this task force, and he said that he was. He's available. And the biggest benefit that we have with Mr. Brown is that he's been attending some of these commission, these task force meetings. So he's kept up on what's happening, has been observing what's been happening, and I think he would probably make a pretty good commissioner, or pretty good task force member. So that's what I would leave for you tonight. If you do wish to fill this, that's how you would do it if it were a standing board and commission. Happy to answer any questions.
No, thanks for that input. Any questions for Manager Neal, or is there a motion to appoint Steve Brown to the Housing Strategy Task Force effective January 8th, 2020?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yes.
Comment?
I'd like to ask well, I have a question about the task force and progress. Should we wait after the vote for that?
You want to take that up in concerns of council or council comments? Or do you want to do it now?
You know what?
Why don't we take the vote and then
we can do it under council comment later on.
Okay. Any further comment here or inquiry? All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Would you care to make that comment now?
Well, what I'm curious about is the task force been meeting for a while, and I'm just wondering when the first check-in is with us, like at a work session, so we can sort of see what's up.
Yep, we are calendaring that check-in with you for in the first quarter of 2020. I just got it put on my calendar this week that we're going to get our first look at the Maxfield data sometime next week, actually. So it's coming together, and once that gets in place, I think that's really going to accelerate their discussions and progress.
Okay, so they'll have the study in hand.
Yep.
And hopefully have some direction, and then we can talk about it.
That's right.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. All right. On to correspondence and petitions. Anything that's come in during the course of the meeting other than what we had in the dais or provided to us in advance? Okay. And then aviation noise update. Member Brindle.
The next Noise Oversight Committee meeting is Wednesday, January 15th at 1:30 at the MAC General Office. And just one other thing related to this, and that is that I sent an email to both the mayor and to Manager Neal in September about the idea of an airport relations commission. And it might have been left that I said I was going to do something. So I'm going to do something and provide a draft framework for that commission. It would be a new commission. So one of the work plan items of the Noise Oversight Committee in 2020 is a noise study in the city of Edina. So we're going to be able to gather some data. And I will say that the complaints that come in from Edina residents, and I actually don't pay attention to many of the complaints from other cities, but the complaints that come in from Edina residents are, the information is full of data. It's noisy outside. It's the time of day, it's the kind of aircraft, it's the altitude, so people really are paying attention and trying to inform us of, this is a pattern, this is something I see. And so I think the information from the study will be interesting, but I think having a commission to kind of help people have a platform to represent the city, I think would be good.
Thank you. Manager Neal, anything on that category?
Nothing more to add.
Aviation noise update. Council comments, Member Anderson?
Yes, thank you. Tonight, I think, is very interesting in terms of the Prospect Knolls special assessment matter. And we've been kicking around alternative funding mechanisms for a while. The optional sales tax issue has been a point of discussion. And it just seems as if we have a lot of factors pointing towards really reconsidering policy and trying to figure options. And so I'm encouraged by that, because these things are just becoming awful darn expensive and difficult to do, and yet our challenge is profound in terms of infrastructure and rebuilding, and we've got a big job ahead of us still in this area. And so I think it's an interesting juxtaposition of circumstances that bring us to this and say, okay, good, now I think we begin to see a direction.
Good, thank you. Member Brindle.
Pardon me. Thank you. So I have a couple comments related to trash and recycling, and it really has to do with the number of complaints that I've been receiving, and maybe you've been receiving them as well. I think the holidays in the middle of the week, with a winter storm between them, created kind of a public relations challenge for the city, as well as our recycling hauler and at least one of the trash haulers, where residents are saying, now wait a minute, you missed me, but you were supposed to be there today, and the hauler says, oh yeah, well, we'll be there, and they set a time that they'll come, and they miss it. And then the resident calls and they are given 4 different days that the hauler is going to come and get it, and they never show up. And then finally the hauler said, nobody's coming, and we're not coming till our next scheduled date. And so it's become, and I do think it's just kind of this perfect little storm that happened with midweek holidays and all of that. But nonetheless, I think the mixed messages, the poor customer service, has me really wondering about how it is that we license haulers. Why do we have 6? Why do we need 6? And, it's that old question that keeps bubbling up to the top as far as trash and recycling. We have 6 licensed haulers. One of them is our recycling hauler. So I suppose you could say we have 6, and one of them is the recycler. But that one does travel the streets twice on trash day. But anyway, it is something that I think we need to look at. But the poor customer service has me thinking that if there is something in the way a license is issued from the city of Edina that requires good customer service, that requires attention to Edina's customers. Edina is a high maintenance. We require people to pay attention to us. And I don't apologize for being high maintenance. I really don't. And this is an example of not backing down and saying, oh, well, it was the holidays, it'll get better. Well, this was the chance to show how you could manage through a challenge. And I don't think it was done well by at least 2 of the haulers. So.
Good. Member Fisher.
I don't have anything tonight. Thanks.
I'm just looking at my calendar here, and over the holidays, of course, we were all busy with family-related things. City things were not quite as pressing. I do note that 1 o'clock this coming Saturday, I believe, is the Winter Ice Festival at Centennial Lakes. And maybe Manager Neal, you had that on your list, but also that is also the day of our council retreat this coming Saturday. So we'll be busy for a full day there. The only other thing I thought was something we should talk about. Well, two things. I can't recall where we were with the Health Commission on the vaping issue, because we led on Tobacco 21 with the encouragement of our Health Commission, and I'm just wondering where we are on the vaping, and I can't recall the outcome of that meeting we had with our.
Yeah, and I'll need to find out. I think that there's something coming from them, but I'll find out and report back to you on that.
Okay, all right. Then the other thing I thought was important was we have some comings and goings on boards, on commissions actually, and people that have agreed to stay on, to continue to work after they were appointed and coming for subsequent terms. Art and Culture Commission, Michelle Morgan Nelson. These are folks that are continuing to serve us, have indicated they want to continue to serve. On Community Health, Amanda Herr, Robert Lesh, Greg Wright. Board of Appeal and Equalization, Andrew Ayers and Philip Buchvold. Energy and Environment Commission, Michelle Horan and Bayardo Lanzas. Human Rights and Relations Commission, Michael Epstein and Rick Ross, both continuing. Heritage Preservation Commission, Sarah Nimo. Park and Rec Commission, Greg Good, Julie Strother, Patrick Willett. Planning Commission, Lou Miranda and Joanne Olson, continuing on. Transportation Commissioners Mindy Ayler, Bokar Kane, and Lori Richmond, all indicating they're willing to continue. So we thank all of them for being willing to continue. And then people that are leaving for one reason or another, Ann Miller, Doug Higley off the Arts and Culture Commission, Allison Pence, Britta Orr, Andrew Johnson Cowley, and Christy Zilka off the Community Health Commission. Mainstays for us over the past several years, hate to lose them. Doug Hall and Kip Peterson on Construction Board of Appeals, Bill Glahn and Howard Hoffman on Energy and Environment, Gabe Adderhold, Chris Davis, Lori Blake, and Rachel Mondry on Heritage Preservation, Ellen Kennedy and Pat Arsenault on Human Rights and Relations, Brenda McCormick on Park and Rec, Susan Lee on Planning, and Larry Olson on Transportation. Thanking all of them for a job well done. On behalf of our community, we give them a hearty thank you. And for Larry Olson, we should also note that he has just been appointed, at least in the recent newsletter, from the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District. He's the new board member on 9 Mile Creek Watershed District Board. So it's nice to have an Edina resident on that board. So that's it for me. Manager Neal has a few things on his list. Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. I've got two things for you tonight. One is that we have been contacted, and I know that Mayor, you and Councilmember Brindle have been both contacted. I'm not sure about other council members, by folks from Wooden Hill Brewing who have been wanting something called a consumption and display permit. We don't have any of those permits currently in our city, and so there was a discussion with them and with the city attorney about what exactly is this permit, who issues it, because we're unfamiliar with it. So I have asked the city attorney if he would just give us a little bit of a primer on what a consumption and display permit is, and then I'll tell you about the process that we're going to go through. So.
Okay, very good.
Mayor, members of the council, a consumption and display permit historically used to be called anyway a bottle club. It's where a person can bring in their own bottled liquor and leave it at an establishment and drink their own liquor rather than buying it from the establishment. There used to be a lot more of these, but there's still some of them out there apparently. And although it used to be called a bottle club, technically it's called a consumption and display permit. Consumption and display permits are not issued by the city. They're issued by the state of Minnesota. But once they approve a permit, the state does, it comes to the city council, and the city council has to decide whether to say yes or no to that permit. You can turn it down or you can approve it. And what we've done is, since we have nothing in our ordinance addressing that issue, we've drafted a draft ordinance to put that in your ordinance so you can consider it if someone applies for it.
The ordinance should have been included in tonight's packet. It wasn't. We will get it out to you as soon as we can. You're not missing much in terms of an ordinance. It's about as bare bones of an ordinance as one can imagine. It simply envisions how you would consent to a permit that's been approved at the state level. The concern that we wanted to at least share with you as staff is that this just introduces a new format in terms of how liquor is consumed in the city. It's different than what's currently at Woodin Hill. Woodin Hill currently has a liquor license that allows them to sell what they produce on site. So this would enhance what happens there. They say they need it to be more competitive with folks that are in the hospitality business and meeting business and private party business, and they think that it will help kind of even the playing field for them. So I just wanted to introduce that to you tonight and let you know that that item will be on your calendar for your next council meeting on January 22nd. And we have shared that timeline, and we have shared the ordinance with the folks at Woodin Hill, so they know what's coming.
All right, Member Brindle, you may want to comment about, what we understand, or you understand they're trying to achieve here, which falls under this definition.
Sure. So this is an opportunity to dig into liquor ordinances in the state of Minnesota a little bit further than we had before. But the objective here is when they hold an event, particularly one example given was a wedding. So the wedding party currently cannot have a champagne toast. And so in order for the wedding party to bring in champagne and have a champagne toast, the establishment needs to have a consumption and display permit that allows the patrons to bring in their own intoxicating beverage. So that was really the compelling example for me that, I think it makes them more competitive, but I think it really helps them in their event market to accommodate people who do not drink beer, hard seltzer, or some of the other offerings that they make at Woodin Hill, and be able to have those people be able to experience Woodin Hill and their guests experience Woodin Hill. So that's what I got out of it. And it's not, they would not be the first tap room to have a consumption and display permit. There are some in the Twin Cities already, and so that also made them curious and want this because it's available and they can do it.
To me, my understanding was from visiting with them that their first choice would have been able to have had a wine permit, be able to sell beer and wine like a lot of other places in our community. But because of the nature of their business as a tap room or a microbrewery, they're precluded by state statute from selling wine. And I think it was some anti-competitive legislation that was put in place. It strikes me as very odd. You'd think wine distributors would be more than happy to support somebody in the beer business that's manufacturing their own beer on the site, also being able to sell wine. So when you bring your wife over there to Woodin Hill, you can't get her a glass of wine. But if they had this consumption and display permit, I think primarily, as Member Brindle said, to be able to use it when they have events over there in their event room, to be able to allow people to come in and be charged for having champagne there or to bring in wine, they would pay a fee for that, and then it would be monitored like they monitor everything else in terms of consumption. But it gives them a little bit more flexibility, and maybe we eventually get this state law change that allows them to be able to just sell beer and wine on premise. But in the meantime, this seemed like the only avenue available to them, to be subject to all of the other constraints that they have in place as a microbrewery. And to me, when we finished the conversation, it made some sense in terms of wanting to at least have a conversation about it when we see the language of the ordinance, right, and then think it through and have a council conversation, right, about it. So, yeah. And then you had one other matter too, I think you wanted to talk about.
I did. If there are no more questions on that one, the second matter is just to advise you that the comment period on the EPA's proposed establishment of a Superfund entitled the Highway 100 County Road 3 Groundwater Plume Superfund site has been extended. We will have the opportunity to introduce a set of comments to you. They're being drafted right now by legal counsel, and we'll present those to you at your January 22nd council meeting. I do want to tell you that the extension date is February 5th or 6th, 3rd? But this will be the only opportunity you'll have as a council to kind of review and endorse those comments so that we can get them in to EPA before the closure of the period. So they're being worked on right now, and you'll have them in your packet at the next meeting.
All right, very good. It'll be good to get our comments in. I think that supports the good work our communications department did, led by Director Benarat, with respect to informing our residents about this issue. That prompt anything further from any of our members? All right. Any council members? All right. I think that does it. We stand adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Brown.